Hey everyone, hope all is well. Today I thought I'd talk a little bit about the Metaverse, my opinions on it, what it is, augmented reality, virtual reality, the Metaverse, Facebook, or Meta as they're now known. So let's get into it. If you're completely new to the idea of a metaverse, then the first thing to really wrap your head around is the idea of AR and VR, which are augmented reality and virtual reality, because these two things are really what make the metaverse possible, or I should probably say will make the metaverse possible in the future. So the differences between the two are that with augmented reality, you can still see the world around you, but holograms or like fake graphics are placed within the real world to appear as though they're actually there. For example, you might see a billboard sign on the motorway which appears as though it's actually there through your lenses, but in reality it's just a hologram. Virtual reality, on the other hand, is quite different. It's a fully immersive experience where you can't see the world around you at all, but you're immersed in a completely virtual world where anything can happen really. So the key difference is that with virtual reality, it's no longer using the real world to place objects into. It's a completely different world and you can no longer see the actual world. You're wearing like a fully immersive headset. Now the metaverse is quite an interesting idea and it's not completely well defined, but as far as I understand it, it's basically where you use this AR and VR technology to create almost like a parallel world where all sorts of things can happen that aren't actually happening in the real world. For example, with AR, you might be walking along the street and see people or holograms that aren't actually there but appear really real, or you might see directions in front of you, you might see advertisements around you, which we'll get onto later as a potential issue, which aren't actually there. And with virtual reality, for example, you could be in a completely different building than you actually are in and be meeting people who aren't actually there, walking around and experiencing something completely different from the world you're actually in. These two different paths that you can go down with something like the metaverse, AR versus VR, are both equally fascinating. I personally find the idea of an augmented reality metaverse a lot more appealing, just because I can see it being less isolating. You're not completely blocking yourself off from the world, but you get a lot of benefits that you can't actually get in the real world. Whereas with the virtual reality path that you could go down, it seems like it would be very closed off. You'd be wearing a completely immersive headset and you'd be completely isolated from the real world. But on the other hand, you might be able to experience things that you wouldn't with something like AR, which is like a completely different world. So who are the main players in this space? Up until now, you've probably seen this technology, or at least the virtual reality side of the technology, being used in gaming quite a lot, with companies like Oculus, who are part of Meta/Facebook, same thing. But also other companies like Microsoft have experimented with the idea of augmented reality, where they made the HoloLens, I believe it was called, headset, which basically allowed companies, in particular Ford took this on, I believe, where their employees could wear the headsets, walk around an empty room, and they'd all be seeing a concept car in front of them that wasn't actually there, and they could interact with it, talk to each other about elements of the design, even though the car wasn't actually there. So that's quite a cool use case, but on the other hand, the truth about that headset was that the field of view wasn't actually as good in real life as promised. It still seemed a bit fake. It didn't seem like an object was really in the room, that you could sort of still tell that it was a generated image or graphic. So there have been attempts to make this sort of thing a reality in the past. I wouldn't say they've been entirely successful. And nowadays, Apple are even rumored to be releasing their own either AR or VR headset within the next year or two, so that's quite exciting. At the moment, despite there being many startups and even fairly large companies out there working on their own versions of AR and VR, it does seem that Facebook, or Meta as they're now known, is the only company that's really dedicated almost 100% now to the idea, and as you can tell, have even switched their name from Facebook, so primarily like a social media type company, to Meta, which really indicates that they're going really deep into this metaverse idea. And Mark Zuckerberg, their CEO, is really open about this, about how he really believes that the metaverse is the future. The truth is that as excited as I am for this sort of technology to come out, it does seem that Meta are going to have a bit of a monopoly, at the beginning at least, because they are buying out a lot of startups who are working on the technology, and they seem to be the only large company out there who's really dedicating a lot of their resources to it. Apple are working on their own version of either an AR or VR headset, but it seems like it's sort of more of a side project rather than their main goal, whereas Meta have made it clear that the metaverse is their main goal in the future. I would like to see a bit more competition out there, because having a monopoly in the market is never really a good idea in the long term for anything. All of that aside though, what are the use cases of a metaverse or AR or VR headset, all of this technology? What's it good for? Well, we've already discussed that this has been implemented a fair bit in gaming, in particular the VR aspect, and some companies like Microsoft have made specialized products for car companies like Ford, as we discussed, but there's so much more that this could be used for in the future as per certain people's visions like Mark Zuckerberg, where they can see, virtual meetings happening where you're wearing like a virtual reality headset, and in front of you you can see a table with people, maybe your colleagues, who aren't actually there with you, but you can interact with them as if they were. They have 3D avatar versions of themselves, which could be hyper realistic. You could lean over to the person next to you and whisper something to them, just like you would in a real room, and interact with them, talk to them, and everything. Like 3D audio would be in effect, and spatial audio, all of that sort of thing, to make it feel like a real meeting environment. You could even have not only a virtual reality meeting in a particular room, but a whole virtual reality block or building, where in this building you could be walking around, maybe not physically walking around in the real world, but moving around like you would in a game with your avatar and interacting with colleagues, going to a virtual cafe and discussing, going to different rooms, having activities, all of that sort of thing. So it is a really exciting idea, especially if you don't want to invest a lot of money into physical, assets like buildings and stuff like that. All of that could essentially be done through one virtual reality headset. With augmented reality, where you can actually see the world in front of you, you could use a similar idea, except this time there is a physical building or room with a physical table and chairs, but maybe a couple of your colleagues couldn't make it in, or they live in another country. You could probably see their avatar sitting in an empty chair as though they were actually there, and interact with them as though they were actually there. But in reality they're just holograms. So that's a potential use case. Maybe also with augmented reality you could see driving directions in front of you as you drive down the road, or walking directions, anything, signs that aren't actually there, advertisements which aren't actually there, which are tracking your eyes and being placed in strategic places so that you see them, which is a bit dangerous, a bit scary to think about actually. There's other obvious use cases like gaming, as we mentioned, hyper realistic games, or even augmented reality games where you're wearing a pair of glasses where you can see objects or cartoon characters or whatever in the real world that aren't actually there, and you could be doing like Pokemon Go or something with something that looks hyper realistic. Those are a few of my ideas of what a technology like this or a metaverse could actually be like, or actually be useful for. I'm sure there's many other ideas which are probably even cooler out there, which I haven't even thought of yet. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are in the comments below. What are your ideas for things that could happen in a metaverse which could be beneficial, which you can't currently do in the real world? Before I wrap up the video, I thought I'd talk about some of the cons as well, because it's all well and good having all of these benefits, but what are the potential things that are going to cause issues? And the first thing which sort of worries me is advertising. Facebook, or Meta as they're now known, are well known for being an advertising company. That's how they make money. That's their business model. So if they were to make an augmented reality set of glasses that everyone out there is wearing and is immersed in this metaverse, then they could really take advantage of that and, be placing ads in specific locations in the real world all the time that they know you're going to see because they can track where your eyes are looking, and you might not even realize that they're fake, and you might even not even realize that they're there. It might just be something in your peripheral vision that you see and you're getting advertised to without even knowing it. So that's pretty scary. The other thing is just the sheer amount of data that the company who makes a headset like this would have access to. They'd be seeing everything that you see. They'd be tracking everything that you do, everything that you see around you, all your interactions. That amount of data is pretty much infinite, or at least tends to infinity. So it's not like now with your phone where they might see what you search on Google or something. This will be a much deeper level of data collection. So there would need to be some laws put into place to get ahead of this. The third thing, which I've already mentioned actually, is the idea of a monopoly forming where, say, Meta are the only company that release a product anytime soon that's any good, and everybody's just using Meta's product. They could choose whatever price they wanted for the headset. There'd be no competition. They'd be the only company collecting data. There might not be good regulation on that at the beginning as well. So it's a bit of a worrying idea. And finally, the last thing is what this is going to do to people's brains. There's already a lot of issues with social media and people using their phones a lot. There's already a lot of downsides to that in terms of mental health. But if you're continuously immersed in either an augmented reality world or a fully virtual world with glasses or a headset on you all the time, even when you're out and about walking and advertisements being flashed everywhere, what's this going to do to people's brains? It seems like an immensely cool idea to me, but it also seems like it's going to drive people mad. I guess we'll find out when or if it becomes a reality. Certain people out there, like the CEO of Meta, Mark Zuckerberg, really do believe that this is the future, as I said before. Others are more skeptical. I'm sort of in between. I think it will happen eventually, but it won't be as hyper-realistic, or the technology won't get there for still a few more years to come. Well, that's it for this week. I'd love to hear all of your thoughts in the comment section below, and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. If you did like the video, then definitely hit the thumbs up button, and if you want to see more content like this in the future, a good way to do that is by hitting the subscribe button and the notification bell below.